American liberal media has done it, and they've done it in classic fashion and possibly in the worst possible context that they could. They've once again elevated totalitarian communism by loving its style points. And I would say that this is the worst case of bootlicking that I've seen in, in all the research that I've done ever. Look, why is this so bad? That CNN and other media outlets, I think NBC, they also bought into some of the crap from North Korea. Why is it so bad? Well, it's bad because they've already had enough. How many times do they have to take the bait before they realize that they're basically justifying the worst abuses of human life in history? And there's lots of people who are now making the parallel to the 1936 Berlin Games, when Hitler had a lot of great press because the games were well organized. He did a good job of building facilities for it. The athletes, they had pretty good accommodations. It was a pretty successful Olympics game, and there was some criticism of Hitler at the time. But why would I say that it's worse than Adolf Hitler and the 36 games, and it's also worse than other instances of foreign Western liberal media fawning over communism? Well, they've had so many times to see the end results that this time it's clear that it's all about the style points. It's all about the fact that this is a woman, and the story that I'm talking about, I'll show you to the right in a second. It says Kim Jong-un's sister is stealing the show at the Winter Olympics. And it says, if diplomatic dance were an event at the Winter Olympics, Kim Jong-un's younger sister would be favored to win gold. With a shake and a warm message in South Korea's presidential guest book, Kim Yo-jong has struck a chord with the public just one day into the Pyeongchang Games. And I hope Pyongyang and Seoul get closer in our people's hearts and move forward the future of prosperous unification, she said in her guest book message, referring to the capitals of North and South Korea. Seen by some as her brother's answer to American first daughter Ivanka Trump, Kim, who's 30, is not only a powerful member of Kim Jong-un's kitchen cabinet, but also a foil to the perception of North Korea as antiquated and militaristic. But as North Korea's brutal dictator, Kim's brother has ruled with an iron fist since coming to power, operating Nazi-style prison camps, repressing political opposition, and even executing senior officers and his own family members in an effort to consolidate power. In Pyeongchang, her presence is a major storyline for reporters and the buzz on the street, with some in South Korea curious and accepting, while others are skeptical, if not downright cynical. Somebody says here, her being here is not that bad, but I feel North Korea has shown up to the Olympics without paying, said Yoon Jun Young. That's a good point. 23, indicating that the nation hasn't made any political concessions to mirror its participation in the international sporting stage. Kate Yu, 21, who likes Yoon, spoke to CNN during Saturday's hockey match between Switzerland and the unified Korea team, said she doesn't think it's the best thing to have her here, although maybe part of having one of the Kim dynasty over is like a safeguard, then they won't attack. And then you see her shaking hands with the president of South Korea. And it says here, the first member of the North's ruling dynasty to visit the South since the Korean War ended in an armistice in 1953, Kim on Saturday made headlines across the globe when she delivered an invitation to South Korean President Moon Jae-in to visit North Korea. It happened during a historic meeting between North and South Korean officials at Seoul's presidential palace. Image from the lunch meeting at the Blue House, which is South Korea's White House. Broadcast live on South Korean TV showed Moon sitting in front of Kim rather than Kim Jong-nam, North Korea's ceremonial head of state, who is technically the more senior official at the meeting. Kim Yo-jong also attended Saturday's hockey match. He sat with Kim Jong-nam, Moon, and his wife Kim Jong-suk. The Swiss won 8-0. Well, the rest of this is kind of irrelevant, but here's the family tree. The whole point. You see this progression from Kim Il-sung, who was the founder of North Korea, through his son Kim Jong-il, and and basically you have all these children of Kim Jong-il's, including Kim Jong-jun, who is the woman who's featured in this story. And of course, there's the current leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. So I don't speak a ton about North Korea on this channel because I think that there are some great resources to talk about it. Now, if you want to go and find somebody who's sympathetic to North Korea, you could always go to the guy that I laugh at called the Ginger, who's an asshole, who's a member of the Workers' World Party. And he's on RT, and he has a sympathetic view of North Korea, which is consistent with the communist worldview. And if you want like a vision of North Korea that's not filled with bullshit, you can go to Michael Malice, who actually journeyed to there several times also. I think Maupin was also in North Korea, so I'm not disputing that he has some knowledge and firsthand experience with it. But yeah, Michael Malice went there and he met Kim Jong-il, the previous leader, and he has a deep and abiding knowledge of the country. And what people should understand is that in every respect, what happens in North Korea today is the end result of not just the unresolved peninsular crisis in Korea, but we're seeing people in the West just observing this and saying, well, there's this pretty face who's on. By the way, she's not that pretty, by any standards. But I mean, if you think about it, there's a lot of Korean women who are much better looking than Kim Jong-un's sister. But in any case, by any standard, North Korea is the worst police state in the world right now. And how many times does the Western media have to get it wrong when it comes to communist regimes before they realize that they don't have any understanding of these people? They just seem to buy the hype. They seem to eat the propaganda like basically, like it's some sort of cannoli or something. They just gobble it up. This woman is representing her brother, who is one of the most brutal dictators in the world. And people were tweeting all sorts of shit like how dare Mike Pence not stand for the leader of North Korea. You have to understand, we have never had relations with North Korea on a regular basis, and we probably never will. Because they're a regime that's dependent on tension with the outside world in order to exist. If they didn't have an enemy on the outside, the place wouldn't make sense. They require an enemy. There are other places in the world that do practice that. For example, I would say Afghanistan, where the Taliban, and any of these Islamic states, Iran, Afghanistan, Venezuela, Cuba. So, some would say we're kind of like that, but no, we've had portions of our history where we haven't had wars with other countries. Now, North Korea, the media has gotten so wrong this time. And why do I say they've had so many chances to get it right? Well, in 1936, a lot of the Western media did love Hitler's display of power, and they could be forgiven maybe because a lot of the crimes that Hitler committed hadn't been committed yet. His crimes. I mean, the Holocaust first and foremost, but also a lot of it. He committed crimes that were violations of the proper conduct of war, as was known at the time. And I think Hitler also set in motion the end of the idea of war as an honorably conducted matter. I mean, as if it was ever that honorable. I mean, there were always atrocities that occurred during a war, but he was a person who he always authorized his troops to kill POWs, torture POWs, things like that. He ripped up the whole Red Cross and Geneva Convention on treatment of prisoners of war, and Japan did too, by the way. So nobody misunderstands that Japan committed plenty of war crimes during World War II. It's just people don't talk about it as much because because it's ignored. It's ignored because Hitler was the more colorful and easy to hate dictator for many Americans. After World War II, it became a little less because of the two atomic bombs. It became a little less politically correct to hate the Japanese. So that kind of faded away. So anyway, back then there were in the mid 30s, there were people who viewed Hitler and his regime as the cutting edge of human civilization, and they were creating massive public works. These highways, the autobahn, and new factories and industries and war industries, in fact. So people could be forgiven because it looked like he had brought Germany from the brink of destruction all the way to some sort of renaissance. Okay, and that's why people to this day they make parallels between Hitler and leaders that they dislike, who they think are becoming too dictatorial. It is a reason why they dislike Donald Trump, because they think that his America First policy mirrors that of Adolf Hitler. But it's simply you can't compare somebody who immediately moved to jail his political opponents by burning the Reichstag down. That's Adolf Hitler, and merging his office with other offices, to Donald Trump, who has actually restored a lot of the constitutional provisions through his own conduct. He's actually devolved a little more power back away from the presidency, and hopefully he'll do more, because if he doesn't, we're in a shitload of trouble when he leaves office. And if he abuses that power, the power that's been unjustly given to the president's office, then he is pretty bad. I still wouldn't call him Hitler though. I mean, it's ridiculous. But yeah, they are so quick to criticize Donald Trump as Hitler, and then they turn around and they look at this woman, this mannequin who was brought over from North Korea, basically this chess piece of her brother's, who comes over, and they instantly they go goo goo gaga over her. It's the most pathetic thing ever. And on The View today, there were all those hens who are on the show, these weird menopausal women. They had basically a slobber fest over how she pissed off. They think she pissed off Mike Pence, and that he was disrespectful for not standing for the Korean national anthem, when he had said that you should separate sports and politics, and that people should stand for the anthem. Yeah, he was. There's a big difference. First of all, he was talking about our anthem, that the athletes from our country should stand for our anthem. That's a distinction. To not stand for another country's anthem is much less of a disrespect, because you don't serve the citizens of another country. You serve the citizens of your own country. So in my opinion, Mike Pence was entirely consistent. And if people are so pissed off about America not standing for, or our vice president not standing for another country's anthem, look, this is a country that burns our flag all the time. And in the Olympics, there have been countries that have consistently not stood for other countries' anthems, and I think you know who I'm talking about, but I'm not going to get into that. Um, this is really, and I'll go through a couple of rehashing of the past. The first of all is Edgar Snow, and Edgar Snow, and I have his book. It's called Red Star Over China. This was a guy. He was an apologist for Chairman Mao before Chairman Mao was seized control of China, and he went over to China in the 30s and started talking to Mao, and he basically created the cult of personality in the West around Chairman Mao. And what did he get for that? Well, in the 40s, he started to do some journalism, if you can call it that, in Russia and throughout the East, where he said, this is what he said. Shortly before the United States entered World War II, Snow toured Japanese occupied areas of Asia and wrote his second major book, Battle for Asia, about his observations. After writing this book, Snow and his wife returned to the United States, where they separated. In April 1942, the Saturday Evening Post sent him abroad as a war correspondent. Snow traveled to India, China, and Russia to report on World War II from the perspective of those countries. In Russia, he shared his observations of the Battle of Stalingrad with the American embassy. At times, Snow's defense of various undemocratic Allied governments were denounced as blatant war propaganda, not neutral journalistic observation, but Snow defended his reporting, stating, in this international cataclysm brought on by fascists, is no more possible for any people to remain neutral than it is for a man surrounded by bubonic plague to remain neutral toward the rat population. Whether you like it or not, your life as a force is bound either to help the rats or hinder them. Nobody can be immunized against the germs of history. So this was a guy who became ideologically committed to communism, partly because he believed it was the only answer to destroying fascism, and it was a very common viewpoint at the time, and that's why I'm saying at that time it was understandable. It was understandable during the time of Edgar Snow that people would think, well, we really hate fascism or Nazism, we're going to side with communism, and that was the way that a lot of people thought at the time. And to be honest with you, it was a common perspective on the other side that the only alternative to communism was to support fascism or Nazism or Japanese militarism. But in any case, Snow, once the war ended, it's not like he returned to the United States and continued to live a normal life. It's said by 1944. So all this stuff that I'm talking to you about is from John Hamilton's Edgar Snow biography, which I'm probably going to do a little more material on. By 1944, Snow was wavering on the question of whether Mao and the Chinese communists were actually agrarian democrats rather than dedicated communists bent on totalitarian rule. His 1944 book, People on Our Side, emphasized their role in the fight against fascism. In a speech, he described Mao and the Communist Chinese as a progressive force who desired a democratic, free China. Writing for the Nation, Snow stated that the Chinese communists happened to have renounced years ago now any intention of establishing communism in China in the near future. In 1944, he predicted, if the communist Chinese took over, well, they wouldn't really institute communism. How did that work out? How did that work out? This is the same type of bullshit talk that is going right now with the people of Telesur, Abby Martin, who I critique pretty much all the time. That they're trying to say, well, no, we really are a democracy in Venezuela. It's the rest of the world that isn't a democracy. Well, we're really a democracy. Meanwhile, presidential candidates are being jailed, and more assets are being stripped of their owners. And it is becoming a full communist country. They're destroying their own oil industry. There are parallels between Edgar Snow of the 40s and journalism of today. These people, they don't. First of all, I would say that Abby Martin is a completely appropriate successor to Edgar Snow's legacy, or that of Walter Duranty, who I have an article here, and I put it in the chat in the description. It says Ukrainians want pro-Stalin writer stripped of the Pulitzer, drug addict, sexual predator on both sexes, and apologist for Stalin. British reporter Walter Duranty still managed to win America's most coveted award for journalism, the Pulitzer Prize, for his coverage of Soviet life in the 30s. Now a campaign has been launched to strip him posthumously of the award by Ukrainians who insist that Duranty, who was born in Britain and worked for the New York Times, helped Stalin to cover up an extermination campaign that claimed millions of lives, mostly in Ukraine. So this was the Holodomor, and it was a forced famine that took place in Ukraine in the 30s, thanks to Soviet attempts to starve out and put down any opposition for peasants who didn't want to give their grain away. And it was one of the worst humanitarian crises of the 20th century, but nobody talks about it. And at the time, nobody was talking about it because Walter Duranty, writing for the New York Times, was basically denying that anything was happening. He was trying to say, well, no, this is a bunch of lies, and nobody's dying. There's no famine, and people can just forget about it. Well, history doesn't look kindly on those that deny forced famines. And the people who are true journalists who won't get on CNN are people like, and I've offered him to be on the show, but instead he says he prefers just to write back. Bram Ebis. Another story. Again, I don't care how many people object to me talking about Venezuela. There's people who object to me because they think it's ridiculous how much I talk about it, and then there's people who think that I'm just piling on Venezuela. But this is from Manga Bay, and it says, or Manga Bay, I think it is. Maduro seeks the sell-off of Venezuela's natural resources to escape debt. And this is more along the lines of the Arco Minero article that I featured a few weeks ago, just talking about it. It says President Nicolas Maduro, an enigmatic smile blossoming beneath his trademark mustache, proudly displays a gold ingot to the Venezuelan press. The metal is reportedly part of a batch dug and processed inside the Arco Minero, a vast area covering 112,000 square kilometers south of the Orinoco River and in the Venezuelan Amazon. So he's mining in the Amazon, and that's somehow progressive. Meanwhile, in the middle of the Arco Minero, a minerals expert who asked not to be named out of concern for his safety flashes an even bigger smile as he casts doubt on the authenticity of that ingot and of the first batch of Arco Minero gold. He says Maduro made up some propaganda with some 1,000 kilos of gold. Somebody who does not know better will think, woo, 1,000 kilos of gold, the unnamed source says, laughs, noting that the ingots from that purported first shipment are of different sizes and purity, and more importantly, are completely without certification, meaning that there is no way to guarantee where or when the gold was mined. From whom are they buying, he asks. Illegal mining and the mafias of illegal mining. Here in the Arco Minero, they are called pranes. This mysterious mineral expert is not alone in his views. So I think that this deserves a little more detail, but maybe you do have to take it on faith, that because he is operating in Venezuela itself. It says here the so-called mining arc, a crescent sweeping east to west across Bolivar state, was opened to mining in 2016 by Maduro and covers 12.2% of the nation's territory. The president views its potential wealth as his country's salvation from its horrific economic crisis, and even proposed in December a new cryptocurrency partly based on the region's hidden ores. Government authorities have at times optimistically boasted that the region holds 7,000 tons of gold, worth roughly $200 billion, plus $100 billion in coltan, metallic ore ubiquitous in electronic devices, and 3 billion carats in diamonds. However, the extent of the deposits within the mining arc, a wild and remote region of inaccessible plateaus and mountain and rainforests, is truly unknown. What is certain is that the 4 designated mining areas within Bolivar state are home to 198 indigenous communities. So they're mining in the Amazon. This is how you understand how fucked in the head progressives are when they're complaining about Standing Rock, which I supported the Standing Rock protesters. When they're complaining about drilling in the Arctic National Refuge, which I'm also against. When they complain about the rights of workers to organize and negotiate together, which I'm not crazy about, but I think that there is a freedom of association that allows you to create a union. So I accept that. These people, they're supporting basically slave labor in the Amazon on Indian lands. Doesn't that seem a little contradictory to you? And it was the same thing that happened. All these progressives, Edgar Snow in China, and what's the guy's name, Walter Duranty in Russia. What they ended up doing was they justified their participation in these horrific regimes by saying, for example, Walter Duranty's belief system as far as Russia was that the attempts to impose Western liberal values on Russia were wrong, and then in reality, it's an Asiatic country that was shaking off the Western imperialism by embracing Stalin and Soviet dictatorship. Okay, he had this view that Russians are incapable of living in a free society. Okay, so are you trying to tell me that you believe that the Russians belong under the thumb of military dictators? I don't think so. And I'm not the biggest critic of Putin, but I think that what he's doing is, I wouldn't run a country like that, even if it was Russia. Now, is there validity to that thinking that Russia has to be run by a dictator? Yeah, I think there's some validity to it. But we're not here to praise countries that live under dictatorships through a better alternative. That's not that's not the job of the Western press. If it was, then they should be advocating for themselves to be censored. They should shut the fuck up because they're contradicting their government. So if you advocate for authoritarian governments overseas, like you're doing right now with North Korea, or you've done in the past with China and Russia, then you should shut the fuck up and support Vice President Pence or whatever. Wouldn't that be consistent? But no, they won't shut the fuck up. They just keep going. And the same idea with Edgar Snow. He justified, throughout his career, the Maoist crimes. Mao was probably the most repulsive person I've ever read about. And his conquering of Tibet. People say, "Oh, Tibet was a theocracy. It was brutal and savage and whatever. He did them a favor. He modernized it and whatever." Then never complain again. If that's your belief as far as Tibet is, never complain when the United States is in Afghanistan. I'm not happy that the United States is still in Afghanistan. I think a lot of the people across the political affiliations, Democrats and Republicans, don't want to be in Afghanistan, and it's not a situation. I would say that it should have been thought out much longer when we decided to go in under Bush. But the same people who think that we're imperialists for going into Afghanistan. They're fine with China doing the exact same thing with much harsher policies to Tibet and destroying their shrines, by the way, going into Buddhist shrines and basically ransacking them. So that's what progressivism believes in. And I'm not going to say all progressives do it, because I have friends who don't, who are progressive, and there's probably plenty of them that would, if asked, they would agree with me. Some of them are on the more libertarian side in terms of civil liberties, not in terms of economics, and they would definitely disagree. I mean, I know progressives. You see them on the show, Carlos, for example, and Juan Carlo. Well, I don't think he's going to be back, but that they're progressives who they became disillusioned with the system as it was in Venezuela, for example, and Simone from Brazil. You don't have to be a conservative hardliner like some friends of mine in order to appreciate that these left-wing dictatorships have murdered and coerced their way across the world and just made the world a more miserable place for everyone. And in order to really address that, we have to start promoting independent creators, and I count myself among them, but you have to start promoting your independent creators, people who you think will not end up just reciting the praises of whoever's the flavor of the month. The flavor of the month this month is this weird looking woman from North Korea. No, I'm not going to go along with that. I think there's plenty of people. Stefan Molyneux had an excellent take on it. I think that was Stefan Molyneux. And Mark, they're keeping it very simple. They're saying our country is run by the person that we elected. Who is North Korea run by? Okay, if you can criticize American political process all you want, but when you have a communist country that was founded by this Kim Il Sung, and he dies, and his son takes over, and then he dies, and his son takes over. That's no longer a worker's paradise. That's a monarchy. That's a feudal system, and I'm not going to stand by it. I think that if you were truly progressive for the workers, you wouldn't stand by either. Those of you that are out there, and I know some of you know in your head that what's going on with this story is wrong. I think a lot of progressives already know that CNN is lying about everything, so they know that this would also be a complete and utter lie. And from here, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if war with North Korea is something people should hope for. I probably would say we should try to avoid it, but we're not going to get anywhere by coddling the sisters of dictators. Dennis Prager had the funny saying today on the radio. I was driving home from picking up lunch, and he said, "Yeah, the butcher always has a nice looking sister." The fact that Kim Jong-un has a sister who's well put together, and apparently I looked at her clothes. People were ranting about her clothes. I was like, they don't seem that awesome or whatever. People have latched onto this, and they don't realize. I mean, I have a sister too. I mean, just for your information, I have a sister, and people say she's fantastic. People have come up to me. They say, I can't believe the two of you are related. So just because she behaves nicely to other people doesn't mean that people should like me because they don't know me. They don't know anything that for all they know, I could be the biggest scumbag on the earth or whatever. Everybody has to stand on their own merits, and in North Korea they don't understand that. Everybody in North Korea, they reject that. They reject the idea that people can stand on their own merits. Everybody has to stand on the merits as dictated to them by the regime up top in Pyongyang, Kim Jong-un. So we're gonna break for today. I hope you'd enjoy this. I hope you read some of the pieces I put in the description. Like this video, subscribe to the video, and let me know what you think. Do you think I'm being a little too harsh on anybody here, whether it's Pence or I didn't really criticize Pence that much, but the North Koreans or the media, CNN, progressives or whatever. Let me know what you think, and I'm always willing to read comments and respond when I think that they're deserving of a response.